I'd like to welcome everybody to the November Entuity Tech Talk. For those of you who are new to Entuity Tech Talks, these sessions are designed specifically for customers as well as technical members of our authorized partner community. Today, we're going to look at the RESTful API, which is a new facility introduced in Entuity 15.5, and how you can use these features to your advantage in automating your network management processes. I did want to mention as well that previous Tech Talk videos are available on demand on the Entuity Learning Center, and that's located on the resources page at entuity.com. As well, you can also find it on the Entuity YouTube Center. They're a good resource for learning more about the Entuity product. I'm John Diamond, and I'm a Principal Solutions Architect at Entuity. And also with me today is my colleague, Pete Bars, who's a Field Systems Engineer. And we will be your hosts for the next 20 or 30 minutes. A few housekeeping items before we get into today's content. We have put the call on mute mode to eliminate any outside noise. Feel free to ask questions at any time via the chat panel. We will make sure to have time at the end to take those questions that you've been posting during the presentation. So without further ado, let's get started. Today, we are talking specifically about Entuity 15.5. And if you're not currently running 15.5, you may be missing out on some new features that are designed to make your network management more productive. This slide shows the enhancements which we've made during the last two releases of the product, the 15.0 and the 15.5, just to give you a quick idea of what's been developed recently to keep our product current. The main thing to bear in mind when we do release a product, and we do that twice a year, is a mixture of brand new functionality, such as the RESTful API, of upgrades to existing functionality and modifications to keep the product current and in tune with industry trends. Just want to give a little bit of positioning right now about where the RESTful API really fits into the whole story. The RESTful API is used to allow a variety of server administrative functions to be performed. Now, the actual technology behind a RESTful API can be used for many different purposes. This is the first revision of the API, and we anticipate and intend extending this significantly release by release to accommodate various other facilities. It's not being used today for bulk data retrieval, although you can use it to obtain information about devices under management and views that are configured on servers. But you're not going to be using it to pull back, for example, utilization samples measured on interfaces. That hopefully at some point in the not-too-distant future will be available in a future extension, but not today. Now, the RESTful API and RESTful technology in general, for those who are not familiar with the concept, it's a modern approach to APIs, or application programming interface, way of interfacing between different application packages, and it rides on top of web protocols. So either HTTP or more likely HTTPS to maintain full, secure, encrypted transfer of data between systems is used to allow commands to be launched into an Entuity server remotely, either from the same server itself or more likely from a different server to perform various administrative tasks. Now, I will say up front, this is not a replacement for the web user interface. This is a different user metaphor. The user interface stays as is and will be developed. There's a very important role for a web user interface for administrative as well as user purposes. The API is here for automating and integrating within a larger network operations center type environment. You might call it an OSS. So given that That's the mission. We've got a number of different functions, as you can see on the screen at the moment, that are being covered in this first release. And they range through identifying the server or servers in a multi-server environment, looking at the views that have been created and creating new ones, looking at the devices that are under management and adding new ones and deleting old ones, and all of that type of administrative operation. So without further ado, I'm going to pass control over to Pete, and he's going to take it from this point and allow you to see the whole thing in action.
Sounds good. Thanks, JD, and hello, everybody. Thanks for joining today. What I'd like to do today is show you a number of examples of using the RESTful API in my Intuity environment, and I'd like to focus on two broad use cases. The first one's going to be all about managing devices. The second one's going to be about managing views. So just to give a little bit more detail, I'm going to do this in context of a multi-server configuration. One of the powers really of a REST-based API is the ability to do automation behind the scenes, especially in a multi-server configuration, because I can push devices out to their correct servers. I can make changes in an automated fashion to those devices. I can also make changes and updates to things like views. And these are the two use cases that we'll focus on. And in my configuration, what you see here is I've got a consolidation server, and I've got two connected remote servers. So I'm actually going to use the examples and use this type of configuration in the examples. The way that I'm going to do this is using curl. Curl is just one of the facilities that can be used to leverage the REST API. We provide a number of examples in the documentation on how to use curl, but again, it's just one way to do it, and it's the way that I'll do this, make changes in my examples here. So the first thing that we want to do is from the perspective of my consolidation server. My consolidation server is 10.0.25.5. What I'd like to be able to do is use curl and use the REST API to see what are the other servers that are connected in my environment. And this is something that's really foundational, especially in a multi-server config where you want to track the servers, because we're going to use that information as we move forward to manipulate other components. So let's take a look at that. And from the console, we'll run that curl command. And you can see that I've got three servers. I've got my consolidation server here, and I've got my two remote servers, which are actually polling real network devices. The piece out of this construct that you want to be able to pick up is the server ID. That's the server ID here. We're going to be using this ID for each one of the three servers as we add devices, change devices, add and manipulate views. Now I can actually take this information and I can extend this. If you look at the documentation, you'll see that I can actually see more information about a specific server by extending this URL. We won't do that in our demonstration today, but it is something that's certainly available for you to actually see, the type of server that you're connecting to. Is it a polling server? Does it use SSL? Does it use standard port 80 for HTTP access? Let's go to our first example, though, and actually add a device and bring it under management. Now, what I'd like to do before I do that is take a look at what I've actually got under management. So let's actually run an inventory command. And that's going to look like this. So I can get a list of devices for a specific server. I've got my curl command. I'm including the authentication details that I need. I'm actually using the get operator to be able to get information using the API. I'm focusing my HTTP call on my consolidation server. And you're going to see this as being consistent throughout all the examples. I can actually reach out to any of my individual servers in a multi-server config by going directly at the consolidation server. I'm going to use the API to gather an inventory, and I'm going to focus that inventory using this server ID. So again, the server ID was the result of running the overall server API call that we showed earlier. So let's actually run this, and you can see I've got a number of devices that are being managed, If I take a look at these devices, the IP address, the name, the server that they're on, I'm missing the device that I actually want to manage. The device that I'd like is, I'll see this in a minute, 10.0.50.100. So I'm not managing it, so it's something that I want to bring under management. So let's take a look at that. What would that command look like? And this is what the curl command would be. This is actually what we'll run. So again, I'm using the standard structure. I'm actually changing my operator to post. Now what you'll see is that there are 4 operator types that we're supporting. One is get to get information, one is post to add new information, and throughout our discussion you'll see that I'm using a put, which is really an update, and then also a delete. My URL call, again focused on the consolidation server, is going to focus on a given Entuity polling server. Now, one thing that you'll want to know is if you're adding a device, you want to know which server you want to add it to. The parameters of the device are going to include all the parameters that you would normally see in the web interface. But in my case, I'm just standardizing on IPv4 protocol. I'm bringing this device under management with all of its interfaces. I'm using an IPS naming convention. I'm polling my 10.0.50.100 IP address, and my community string is public. So let's actually use this and run it. And you can see here that I've got the device queued. Now this is consistent with when you add a device in the web interface, it's going to show up in a queued state. Now one thing to note before I go any further is if I was automating this and I wanted to do something like an echo, it's going to return a 0, which is saying that my API call responded with something. It's not going to give you the exact results in all cases. In my case here, it just told me that I have a device that's being queued. If your call, especially when you're scripting this, if your call comes back with information and it comes back with, a positive response, which would be a 0 here, you'll probably want to parse that information. So in my case here, I would want to parse this and actually pick up an IP address or maybe pick up a server ID, but use this as an indication that I want to be able to go through and parse the results. Let's take a look at the web interface and see what we've got for devices. If I go to my consolidation server, take a look at the Explorer, and look at all the objects that I'm managing. If I go down my list of objects, I can see that I've got my new IP address, my new switch device added, and it's certainly, it's being added and it's currently going through reachability testing, which is why you've got the blue icon here. So it's very quick to see that, and I'm seeing that in terms of my consolidation server. If I click on this, you can see that the device that's managing this is this server, which is pbarts-pc. It's actually the same as one of the Champlin SV-01 servers. It's just, I've got this running in a demo mode, so it's mixing the names up a little bit from a Tomcat perspective. But I'm managing the device on the correct server. But one thing that I noticed is I'm calling this based on its IP address. I don't like that. All of the other devices that I've got in my environment are using a naming structure. So what I'd like to do is actually update this device and actually change the name and use a custom name field. So let's go back to just my Explorer menu, and let's take a look at what that command would be. So let me pull up a PowerPoint slide to show this. So to update an attribute, I'm going to go and change some of the fields. So I'm going to set a custom name, but the first thing that I need to know is what is the device that I want to update. In order to do that, I need to get a list of devices and actually find the ID that I want. So the way that I'm going to do this is call the inventory list, which is something that I've done before. I'm going to focus that inventory list on a specific server. I'm going to eliminate some of the error output, and I'm just going to use fgrep to look for a specific string. So let's run that and take a look at the results. All right. So what we're seeing here is the IP address, the display name that I'm using. Here's the ID that I need, ID number 28. It's currently managed on the correct server, and that's all I need to know right now because I'm going to pull this ID and actually update this into my next command. And I'll just update it in my text editor here so I can cut and paste. And actually, before I add that command in, let's take a look at what it is. So again, the same structure. I'm using the put operator, which is basically an update. I'm calling the inventory API, but I'm defining the ID. So in my case, this is going to be ID number 28. I'm focused on the server that is currently managing that device, and I'm changing the attributes. You only need to include the attributes that you want to modify. I don't need to include all of the other attributes like protocol or management level or things like that. I only need to change the ones that or update the ones that I want to actually change. So I'm going to change the name using to a custom field, and I'm going to define the name as Sao Paulo-switch. Let's run it and see what it looks like. All right, so we've got the management IP address, we've got the pulled name. You can see now that I'm using a custom naming convention, and I've got a custom name. If I go back to my web interface and just refresh my screen, if I scroll way down to the bottom, you can see that I've actually got the Sao Paulo switch. If I select that, you can see that I'm still managing it from the specific Intuity server. So a very easy way for me to update and add devices. Now the last piece of device management that I want to show you is I've got a device I want to delete. So if I'm a service provider and I've got customers that are changing, I want to take devices out of my network, or even if I'm an enterprise and I'm going through device changes, you can use the REST API to delete devices. If I pull up the PowerPoint, let's take a look at what that command will look like. Very consistent again, looking at the consolidation server, defining the server ID, and I am using the delete operator. The piece that I need to add in is the ID of the device. So if I update that, and again, I'm going to change this to device number 28, and go back to my console and run this. Here, let's clear out my screen so we get a little bit more real estate. Again, I've got no response, but it ran successfully. And you can define here that this is the device that we deleted out of the system. If I go back and take a look at the devices, and I scroll way down to the bottom, you'll see that my Sao Paulo switch is no longer being managed. So again, very efficient way, especially if you're taking the approach of automation, where you've got a asset control system or a CMDB, and you want to be able to control the devices that are being managed, especially in a multi-server environment. You can actually run these commands from a non-Intuity server. As long as you've got the proper access into the system, you can direct them at a consolidation server and have that actually manage the adds and deletes and updates for all the devices. So let's take a look at our next use case. This is all about managing views. So let's look at the PowerPoint and take a look at one of the examples that we want to use. Okay. I've got a number of data centers that I'm actually managing. If I take a look at the data centers, you can see that I've got devices that are on, a mixture of Intuity polling servers. I'm looking at this in context of my consolidation server. But I've got data centers all over the world, and I'm managing devices on a mixture of individual servers. I'd like to create a view that is really all about my infrastructure. I want to focus on my core infrastructure, and I'm actually going to take that a step further, and I'll show you that in a minute as well. But let's take the first step and actually create a view that is going to focus all of our core infrastructure devices. The process to do that is going to be using the post operator and the views API call. Again, I'm going to focus on an individual Intuity server when I do this. So in a multi-server configuration, when you create a view, you're going to need to create the view on each of the servers that need to have it. So I start with the consolidation server and work my way out to all the individual remote servers. The parameters for the view creation are going to indicate that I've got a name for the view, but initially I want to be able to indicate that this is going to be a parent level view. So using none as my base view is something that's going to help me identify that this is a top level view. The name of that view is going to be core infrastructure. So let's take a look at this and let's run this on each of the three Entuity servers that I've got. There we go. I had a typo at the end of my command string. So I've created one of my views, and you can see that I've got the new view right here. So let's do this on each one of my three servers. You can see I've just populated the second server, and let's take a look at the third one. All right, if I take a look at the web interface, from the consolidation server, if I just refresh the interface, you can see that I've got a brand new core infrastructure view. Now we don't have anything in it. I didn't populate any devices because what I'd like to do is create a subview, and I'd like to populate the subview with the union of all of my data centers and all of the routers and switches. So let's take a look at what that command would look like. Same construct. Again, I'm going to focus this on a specific server ID, but I want to highlight the additional parameters that I'm using, and I'll actually show you what this looks like in the web UI because this is a new method to be able to create views, and you can do it in the web interface as well as using the REST API. I'm defining the name of the view called router switches. I'm identifying that there's a parent path, so I'm going to create a view underneath core infrastructure. I'm using a new aggregation technique which is called union because I want to take the union of all of these base views, all my individual data centers across the world, and take those devices as a union and add them to this view. At the end, I'm going to apply an existing domain filter, that's routers and switches, that's going to take all the devices and then just limit them to any device that's a router or a switch. So again, consistent with the other commands, in a multi-server configuration, this is something that you want to be able to run against each one of your servers. So let's go ahead and run the first one. You can see that I've got the core infrastructure view here, and I've now got my brand new view called routers and switches. Let's run it against the second server. Same result. And the last server. So these all came back successful. Let's take a look at our consolidation server and look for the new view. Core infrastructure. I now have a subview that's focused on routers and switches. And I've populated that from all of my polling servers, all my Intuity polling servers, and focused it on just those device types that I've included in the domain filter. This is a real effective way to automatically maintain the view structure based on devices that are being added. So in a case where you're adding a brand new device, using the content filters will allow you to maintain the structure of your views without having to manually populate them, especially if you've got an automated procedure that's bringing devices under management. Let me just show you an example within the web UI because I talked about the new structure of creating or populating views. That's new in 15.5. So let's take a look at editing a view and look at the contents. This is where you can actually create a base set of views, and this talks about the union and the intersection capabilities. So I can automatically create or populate a view. I can select from any of my existing views to be the base for that content. I can do shift-click, control-click to hit multiple views. I can create a union, but I could as well use an intersection capability. So tell me about only the devices that exist in all these views. So give me the common devices that exist as an intersection. At the end, I'll add a domain filter to filter down what I'm actually seeing. So it's a very effective way to set up a view and maintain that. It can be done via the web interface, and it can also be set up and called upon using the RESTful API. JD, I think that covers it for what I was going to explain. I'll give it back to you.
Well, thank you. And actually, before you give it back to me, could you just hold that screen as it is at the moment? What I had intended to do, and maybe you can do this to help everybody appreciate, the level of documentation that is available online. In fact, if you were to go to Help Content, and within here, just if you were to search on RESTful, it doesn't even need to be capitalized like that. It'll take it all in lowercase. If you just go to the very first entry, right at the top of the list, you will see that list of different resources that are available within the RESTful API as it stands today in its first iteration. And down the bottom, the link to the RESTful API resources will allow you further detail about each and every one of those resources. An example given in curl, as Peter's been working with, is also shown. The fact that we support XML and JSON bindings is shown there. And if you were to just click on one of those, maybe servers/ID, then you'll see that there is a detailed set of information about the options available for that and examples using curl to show how that can work. Now, bear in mind, curl is only one way of issuing commands to a RESTful API. It's very handy because it's highly scriptable, but there are many other ways of issuing RESTful API calls from other packages, even plugins to browsers. Both Chrome and Firefox and probably many other browsers have plugins that allow you to experiment with, test, and debug your calls that are being made to a RESTful API, and they're equally applicable to the Entuity RESTful API. Well, thank you very much, Pete. Do you want to pass control back to Pat? And we will take a look at what's come in through the chat panel.
Sounds good. And actually, one thing that I didn't mention as well, in creating views, one of the parameters that you can use when you generate a brand new view is assigning groups. So once groups are set up for levels of access, you can actually define the groups that are associated with a view as well, and you can do that in an automated fashion.
Right, that's very important. The user groups are critical to the whole permissioning structure within the Entuity system. Great. Okay, Pat, what are we seeing on the chat panel?
Yes, we have a couple of questions. The first one is the iClient RPC utility still available for this version of Intuity in addition to the new curl data transfer utility? And what ports are required for curl?
Okay, two questions there. Let's first of all go for the iClient RPC utility. As is correctly pointed out with that question, we previously, in previous versions of the product, and including this version, 15.5, and including the next version to be available at the end of the year, which will be 16.0, they will all maintain the utility called iClient RPC. That was also provided for automation purposes, and there is a significant overlap in functionality between what you can do with that utility and what you can do through the RESTful API. We are migrating over to the RESTful API, and our plan is mid-next year, that's mid-2016, with the introduction of the 16.5 release, it is our intention to remove the iClient RPC utility. There are very good reasons I won't go into now why that's going to take place, but all of the functionality currently provided and that's being used within the iClient RPC utility will then be available through extensions to the RESTful API. Currently, most of that functionality is provided by the RESTful API. However, port-level operations such as managing and unmanaging ports and adjusting line speed settings for ports are not covered by the RESTful API. They will need to be added and included. There are a couple of other operations as well for setting up and managing IPSLA operations and configuration monitoring settings, and again, they will need to be added to extend it. And there will be additional capability added release by release to the RESTful API. The next thing was which ports need to be opened on a firewall in order to get access through the RESTful API. Well, the RESTful API runs over web technology. If you are running HTTPS on port 443, as most people would, then that's the only port you would need open. If you're not running HTTPS and you're running on the ordinary default web port, then port 80 would need to be open. If you're running on a non-default port, then that would need to be open. Basically, if you can communicate to that remote server using a web browser, then you can use the RESTful API. Okay, and what else do we have, Pat?
Can you use the RESTful API to manage or unmanage interfaces?
As I mentioned in the previous question there, not today. That's a port-level operation, and that's not yet in the scope of the RESTful API, but it will be at some point in the very near future.
And then another question is, for a view created with the aggregate mode union, what will be the event filter? The union of the views event filter?
The event filters are defined at each and every level of the view, so that would be defined within the view itself. So the views from which the contents are being taken do not control the event filtering. That is a separate concept.
Okay. And then is there a plan to add in the RESTful API some command to add or remove remote servers from the consolidation server?
I could certainly see that being a legitimate requirement. We also want to do other work to make that a lot easier and automated. There are times when if you have a remote server that is either in trouble or there are connectivity problems to it, then that can be a bit of a nuisance in a multi-server environment. We are well aware of that and are actively looking at ways to help organizations that run into those issues.
Okay, thank you, JD. And then we have a couple other questions. My organization has one Intuity server which administers all of our devices. Is there a need or benefit to use the API, or is it better to use the GUI?
Simple answer on that one. If what you're doing and what you need to do can be done through the GUI and you're happy about doing that, continue doing it. The API is not here to replace the GUI under all circumstances. The API is there in case people want to implement automation. If you've got a system, maybe a CMDB, which you have a workflow that new devices to be managed are added to the CMDB, and you would want an automated mechanism to then follow on to cause that device to then be monitored by Entuity, then the RESTful API would be a fantastic way to achieve that automation so that the CMDB could reach out to the Entuity server and request that that device be added for monitoring. That's the type of example where the API would be a good fit. If, however, you're just working through the UI and you're perfectly happy to do that, stay doing that. The UI is not going away. It's a completely different use case.
Okay, thanks, JD. And then can we use the RESTful API to modify all the devices at one time?
The answer is not in one operation. In order to do modifications to devices, their settings within Entuity, you would need to iterate through them. You would first obtain a list of the devices. You could then filter that list yourself as to which ones you actually wanted to perform operations on, if you may not want to perform operations on all of them, and then one by one issue the relevant RESTful API calls to perform the changes device by device. It gives you a lot of flexibility.
Okay, thank you, JD. I believe that is everything that's come in on the chat panel.
Great. Oh, thank you very much, Pat. Well, so that's it for the questions. However, do feel free to use the tech.talks@intuity.com email address if you'd like to send us any additional questions. Also, don't forget, that email address is also a good one if you want to send us a suggestion for other technical topics that you would like to see us address in future Tech Talks. Before we sign off, I wanted to let you know of our upcoming calendar of events. For those who are BMC customers, Entuity will be on hand at many of the BMC days around the world. And we're also participating in the Dell Solutions Tour in Europe. For specific dates, visit our website at entuity.com and look on the event page. We have 2 customer webinars in the month of December. The last Tech Talk of the year is on December the 2nd, and the topic will be service management. We're going to be digging into the whole topic of services as they are implemented within Entuity and what you can do with them. We will present Entuity 16.0 and its new enhancements on December the 16th. So go ahead and please mark your calendars, expect an invitation to appear for that event, and I'm very much looking forward to telling you all about all of the new aspects of Entuity 16. And lastly, I did want to remind you that the Entuity Learning Center is available on Entuity.com, and it contains a lot of valuable information for our users. Some of the highlights are a new on-demand training video set, which is available and developed by our training team in London. These videos are helpful for new members of your IT staff, and they can be used as a refresher class on the product or for new Entuity customers. They provide a great foundation for getting started with Entuity. There are training certification programs that offer an opportunity for individuals to demonstrate a level of proficiency with Entuity that distinguishes them within their companies and professions. An Entuity knowledge base and FAQ is included, and support contacts and links to our support portal is there. There's a Tech Talk library, so all of these Tech Talks that you've been listening to are catalogued and available online. And to sign up for the Learning Center, we invite you to email jmaliano@entuity.com, and here the email address is on the screen, and you can include your request and he will generate your login credentials. So to wrap up, we will send you a video link of today's presentation for your use. Also, feel free to share it with your colleagues. If you have any questions on the RESTful API, be sure to contact your Entuity field systems engineer, or just send us an email. And finally, we hope to see you on December the 2nd for our next Tech Talk. And remember, that's all about service management. So for now, thanks very much for attending.